We'll begin by taking a few moments to generate a positive motivation for participating in this session. So try to feel how fortunate we are to have all of the conditions that we have, having a precious human rebirth, and in particular having the chance to learn the Dharma, the Buddha's teachings that show us how to transform our mind from confused, unhappy, disturbed, negative, to more peaceful, more positive, more beneficial for others, and gradually cultivate our qualities that will enable us to become fully enlightened and be able to help all living beings in the best possible way. We're really, really fortunate to have this opportunity, and we need to appreciate how fortunate we are and make good use of our time, this life that we have. So really try to bring that thought, that feeling into our mind that you want to benefit not only yourself, but others, and as many other people and beings as possible, benefit the world if possible, and that is your reason for being here and learning about these teachings. So, today we continued in this section of the text, Je Tsongkhapa's commentary to Chandrakirti's text, Supplement to the Middle Way, which is a commentary to Nagarjuna's text, the Fundamental Wisdom of the Middle Way. So it's all about emptiness, the Madhyamika Prasangika explanation of emptiness. And we're still on this part of the text where Chandrakirti and Lama Tsongkhapa are talking about how hearers and solitary realizers realize emptiness. They must realize the emptiness of inherent existence in order to attain their goal of nirvana. And yesterday, Venerable Chuni asked, "Why is this important?" Something like that. And last night I was thinking about it, and I thought, well, it's important to know what exactly is the root of samsara. What it is that keeps us sentient beings stuck in samsara and take rebirth again and again and again, unable to get free of this state. So the other schools, other than the Madhyamika Prasangika school, say that the root of samsara is this ignorance that believes in or grasps at a certain kind of self, the self-sufficient, substantially existent self. So they say that is the root of samsara. That's the thing that has to be overcome in order to be free of samsara, in order to attain nirvana. But from the point of view of the Madhyamika Prasangika, that isn't the root of samsara. And if you just realize that, you're not going to get out of samsara. You won't be able to get liberated from samsara. You just keep circling in samsara. And so it's really, really important. It's crucial to know what exactly is it that keeps us stuck in samsara. We ourselves have to overcome that if we want to be free of samsara. But also, we're talking here about the Bodhisattva's path. That's the path we aspire to follow. We want to be bodhisattvas, follow the bodhisattva path, and eventually become a Buddha. Why? Because we want to help sentient beings. Why do we want to help sentient beings? Because they're stuck in samsara. We want to help them get out of samsara, right? So if we want to help sentient beings get out of samsara, we have to know what's keeping them stuck in samsara. What's the actual root of samsara? If we don't know that, if we can't identify that, we won't be able to help them get out of samsara. So that's very important. Otherwise, it's a bit like a doctor. If a patient comes and is, not feeling well or suffering from this and that, and it's important for the doctor to make a correct diagnosis of what exactly is wrong with this person. If they misdiagnose what sickness the person has, and then they give medicine, but it's not the correct medicine for what's really wrong with them. They might even get worse. So if the doctor really wants to cure the person, they have to make a correct diagnosis, exactly what is causing their suffering, then they can give the right medicine to cure them. Does that make sense? So it's really important, especially for us, for bodhisattvas, wannabe bodhisattvas, bodhisattva wannabes, wanting to follow this path. But then, of course, also for all Buddhist followers, because those who want to attain nirvana, they have to know the right path, what it is they actually need to do in order to attain nirvana. Okay, so I made another little slideshow, which should be in your inbox. I thought it would be helpful to just kind of go through these different kinds of afflictive emotions, because it may have been a bit confusing today. We're kind of all these different kinds of afflictive emotions, coarse and subtle and common and uncommon and manifest and non-manifest and artificial. And so I thought it might be helpful to just kind of get those straight, and then we'll try to look at what we actually went through today. So the first page of the PDF is talking about the common or coarse. They're the same thing. The coarse afflictive emotions and common afflictive emotions are the same thing. So Geshe-la gave us a definition today. He said a common, he said here at this point, common afflictive emotion. This is an afflictive emotion induced by the conception of I think he just said substantially existent self, but usually it's self-supporting substantially existent self. So the conception of a self-supporting substantially existent self, that's a coarse conception of self. So any afflictions brought about by that conception or that conception itself. Okay, so that conception itself is also a common afflictive emotion. So that conception plus any afflictive emotion like anger, attachment, jealousy that comes about through that conception. And I think the reason he added that extra bit at the end is because if you didn't add that, if you only said a common afflictive emotion is an afflictive emotion induced by the conception of a self-supporting substantially existent self, then somebody might say, so that means that conception itself isn't a common afflictive emotion. So that would be a mistake. It too is a common afflictive emotion. It's the root of the other emotions. So that, and then he talked about the way this conception conceives of the self. He said that conception apprehends the self as being like a master of the aggregates. Like, the I is the master and the aggregates are the servants. So the I, the self, seems to control the aggregates, like the boss. And whatever you wish in terms of the aggregate should come true. You should be able to say, I want to have the most beautiful body in the world, or the most handsome body in the world. And you should be able to have it. And he also said, and this is what it said in the teachings as well, that based on this conception of a self, we may have the wish to change bodies with somebody else or change minds with somebody else. And I remember once I was discussing this with Geshe Kelsang Wangmo, and she said she had this experience when she was in elementary school, primary school. She said, there was a girl in my class who was good at math and very pretty. I remember imagining that I would be her. In other words, imagine that ourselves would swap so that she would get my body and mind and I would get hers. I would have her pretty face and her math skills. So that shows there's a sense of a self that's kind of separate from our body and mind. We can give this body away and take a better body, or give this mind away and get a better mind, but we would still be there, right? So that's the kind of idea or wish that could arise based on this conception of a self. Oh, so go to the next page, page 2. This is something from volume 7, which is still in the works, but I have it on my computer, so I get a sneak preview, because it's about emptiness, and goes into a lot of detail about the various misconceptions of self that we can have. So in there, and I've heard this before as well. It's part of the teachings that there are actually 2 versions of this kind of conception, coarse and subtle. So the coarse conception of a substantially existent self, I abbreviated it here. And coarse here also means acquired. Acquired means this is something that's not innate, not inborn, but we can learn it from studying philosophy or religion or whatever, our parents. So here, the self or the I and the aggregates seem to have different natures, to exist separately, like shepherd and sheep. So they use that analogy. Shepherd is quite different from the sheep. And the shepherd is kind of, controlling the sheep or trying to control the sheep. Maybe it doesn't always work, but that's their job, to push the sheep around, make them go here and there and so on. But they're different. The shepherd and the sheep are quite different entities. So in this form of that conception, the I appears to be independent of the aggregates and in charge of them. So there's more of a separation, independence. And then the subtle version, which is also innate, this is the one we are all born with. Everybody has this one. So here, the I and the aggregates are related. They're not like totally different, but the I is more important, kind of in charge of the aggregates. And analogy that's often used is if there's a group of people who are salespeople, like, they're selling, I don't know, vacuum cleaners or whatever, real estate. So there's a group of people working together doing the same kind of job, but one of them is the head, one of them is the boss of the others. But the boss still does that same work. So they're not so different like the shepherd and the sheep. Okay, so yeah. So the one, today Geshe used the example of a master and servant. The I seems to be like the master, and aggregates are like the servants. So the master is controlling the servants, telling them what to do. So which of these 2 do you think that relates to? There's probably different opinions about it, but I was looking it up in Khyentse Jampa Tekchok's teachings, and he said, according to Prasangika, it's the subtle one, because it's more like the head salesperson and the sub-salespersons. Maybe because they're all people rather than a shepherd and sheep. Shepherd and sheep are really different. But,
a master and a servant. They are similar and they're all human beings, but one is a boss of the others. Yeah, and they say also in this version, the more subtle one, there's also a sense that the aggregates depend on the I, but the I doesn't depend on the aggregates. The I seems not totally independent, but somewhat different, above and independent and controlling, in charge. So there's two versions of this conception. Geshe didn't talk about that, did he? And so, since this conception can be innate or acquired, in Jeffrey's translation, he uses the word artificial. Yeah, so artificial is the same as acquired. Just means not innate. So since there's two versions of this misconception of I, then there's also two levels of afflictive emotions that can arise from that. So there's afflictive emotions arising from the innate grasping at a substantially existent self. There's also afflictive emotions arising from the acquired one. And there's a nice section, if you're interested, in volume 3, page 124. This is Samsara, Nirvana, and Buddha Nature. There's quite a big section in there about afflictions, and there's one section about the acquired, the innate and the acquired afflictions. And it's page 124. And it's really nice because, when it comes to the acquired afflictions, they usually say these are the ones that come from studying tenets, right? And you might think, well, I didn't study any other tenets, so I probably don't have those. But His Holiness says it's not just from philosophical tenets. They can also arise from, I can't remember how exactly it goes, but just for example, our sense of being an American. We're born in America, we're brought up in America, and we acquire certain ideas. America is the greatest country in the world, or whatever. Yeah, and so according to our country, our culture, our religion, our family, our gender, our whatever, all these various identities that we acquire as we go through life, then there can be afflictive emotions that arise related to that. So I was really happy to hear that, because this is something I'd wondered about. I wondered about, these kind of emotions. People can get really emotional when it comes to their country, right? And or religious affiliation or gender or whatever. So those would also be acquired afflictions. So it's like underneath, we do have innate anger and innate attachment and so on. But that's kind of the basis. But then it's probably more on the surface. If somebody insults our country or insults our religion or insults our father or whatever, something that we identify with, then anger can arise as a result of that. That's more acquired. So anyway, there's a nice explanation in there if you want to have a look at it. And so then Geshe explained that, there's these two levels of the Four Noble Truths, coarse and subtle. So the coarse Four Noble Truths and the coarse 16 aspects of the Four Noble Truths are based on this conception of self and the afflictions and the suffering that arise from it. So according to our system, meaning Madhyamika Prasangika, Chandrakirti, Shantideva, Lama Tsongkhapa, and so on. So according to this system, if somebody only meditates on the coarse Four Noble Truths and the coarse 16 aspects, they will not be able to abandon all the negative emotions, all the afflictive emotions, and attain nirvana. They can only be suppressed temporarily. But actually I have a slide later about that. So let's just look at the next slide or the next page. As opposed to the coarse or the common afflictions, we have the subtle or the uncommon. He didn't talk about this today, but he did talk about it yesterday. So just to put it out there. So the subtle or the uncommon afflictions are those that are induced by the conception of true existence or inherent existence. So grasping at an inherently existing I, which is much more subtle than the substantially existent I, and also grasping at inherent existence of others, friends, enemies, strangers, phenomena, and so on and so forth. So that grasping, that conception. So afflictive emotions that come about through that conception are the subtle or the uncommon ones. But he said, but not induced by the conception of a self-supporting, substantially existent self. I was thinking, I think it would be really hard to know if anger is coming up in your mind, for example. Well, is this anger induced by the conception of inherent existence or by the conception of self-supporting substantial existence? Is it artificial or innate? I think you'd have to be highly accomplished to be able to recognize, where this anger or attachment is coming from. And the meaning of the word uncommon is exclusive to the Prasangika. So they are the only school out of all the different Buddhist schools who have this kind of assertion. They're the only ones who say that grasping at inherent existence, grasping at true existence is a delusion, is an affliction, is the root of samsara. And this conception of grasping at true existence also has two versions, innate and acquired. We didn't get into that with Geshe-la, but maybe next year. So since that conception is innate or acquired, then my guess, Geshe-la didn't say this, but I think this is probably true, that, oops, I made a mistake there. It should say subtle afflictions, of course. So the subtle afflictions can also be innate or acquired. So we have so many different levels, different layers of afflictions, subtle and coarse, and each of those has two levels, innate and acquired. It's complicated. A little hard to keep it all straight. But anyway, the next page, the next slide. So this is a sort of summary of the two positions about what it takes to attain liberation. So the lower schools meaning everybody except Prasangika. So starting from Vaibhashika, Sotantrika, Chittamatra, and the Svatantrika Madhyamaka. So all of them say that one can attain liberation from samsara by meditating on the coarse aspects of the Four Noble Truths, which are based on coarse selflessness. So you just have to meditate on the coarse level of selflessness, absence of a self-sufficient, substantially existent self, and then the 16 aspects of the Four Noble Truths based on that. And by doing that, you'll be able to eliminate all the afflictive emotions and be free of samsara, not have to take rebirth anymore. So that's their view. Prasangika, Madhyamika says, no, that's not correct. You have to meditate on the subtle aspects of the Four Noble Truths, which are based on subtle selflessness, meaning the emptiness of inherent existence of all phenomena. So you have to meditate on that. You have to realize that in order to completely uproot the afflictions, abandon the afflictions, and attain liberation, attain nirvana. So this is what's going on in this section of the text that we were going through today, which contains some verses from Shanti Deva. We already started that yesterday, but we continued today. So I had some difficulty today understanding some of what was going on. So I looked at, I have another commentary on this text from Geshe Yeshi, who taught the complete text in Je Tsongkhapa Institute in Italy in about the year 2000 or so. So I have the transcript of that commentary. So I looked, he's got his explanation of things is very clear and very comprehensive. So I was reading that and I feel like I got a bit more understanding from that. So I think today where we started was on page 44 of the PDF of the text, where it says the thought of Shantideva's refutation. So from that paragraph down to where it says impelling a future rebirth through the force of contaminated actions or karma. So there's kind of two paragraphs there. So according to Geshe Yeshi, what's going on here is this opponent is saying that by cultivating the path based on the Four Noble Truths, afflictions can be abandoned. Oh no, sorry, this is what Shantideva is saying. Shantideva's assertion, his explanation is, if you just meditate on the path based on the coarse Four Noble Truths, not the subtle ones, then afflictions are abandoned, so in quotes, but one still has karma that can cause rebirth. And this is because this kind of path can only temporarily overcome manifest afflictions. It doesn't abandon them completely. And so you still have projecting karma to be born in cyclic existence. So this is what Shantideva is saying. So you still take rebirth. Does that make sense? Bad news. You spend all that time meditating on the 16 aspects of the Four Noble Truths and generating all these realizations, and you think you've done it, but you haven't. You still have karma, you still have the causes to take rebirth. And then the next section, starting with where it says, these passages should be explained in this way. So here, Je Tsongkhapa is saying that some commentators, he doesn't mention any names, some commentators and some Tibetans have interpreted Shantideva's verse, this verse of Shantideva, to be talking about people like Moggallana and Angulimala, who were free from afflictions, but they still had suffering in that life. So there's a story about Moggallana getting beaten up by some people. He was trying to tell them that they should stop sacrificing animals, and they weren't happy about that, so they beat him up. And Angulimala also got beaten up. He's the one who killed 999 people and cut off their thumbs and made a rosary made of their thumbs. And then he became a Buddhist. a disciple of the Buddha and became an arhat. But he also got beaten up because I think one time when he was on alms round, people recognized him. Hey, that's that serial killer, that, mass murderer. So they beat him up. Yeah, so there are these stories of people who were arhats. They were arhats, but they still experienced suffering in that same life. But Lama Tsongkhapa is saying this isn't what Shantideva is talking about here. He's not talking about people who are free of afflictions but still experience suffering in that life. He's talking about having the karma to take rebirth in the next life. That this is the outcome. This is the result of just meditating on the course Four Noble Truths. You don't attain liberation. You don't free yourself from karma and affliction, so you still take rebirth. And then the next section, starting with this,
It seems that there's karma for rebirth and there's also karma to experience being beaten. But in both situations, it seems like they're similar and there's still karma there to be experienced. How do you understand?
But maybe the thing is, but I think Moggallana and Angulimala probably were arhats. And so I'm guessing that's the point here. They actually had attained arhatship. They were foe destroyers, so they would have realized the emptiness of inherent existence. But they do say that arhats can still have karma left over to experience suffering, even though they don't have the karma to take rebirth. So I think in the case of those two, they had karma to experience suffering in this life, but not karma to take rebirth. But I think Lama Tsongkhapa is saying that's not what Shantideva is talking about. He's talking about people who not just have karma to experience suffering in this life, but also to take rebirth, meaning they're not liberated. They haven't attained liberation. I think that's what the meaning is. So then the next section, starting with the next verse from Shantideva, which says, though an afflicted mind lacking meditation, and so on. So in this section, the meaning is that without realization of emptiness, one can only temporarily stop the afflictions, afflicted minds, afflicted emotions, but they will arise again. They will become manifest again. And he said it's like this absorption of non-discrimination. So this is a kind of meditative practice that one would cultivate in order to take rebirth in a certain part of the fourth concentration in the form realm. So the fourth concentration of the form realm has a number of different parts to it, or different realms within it. So one of them is called without discrimination. So if you want to take rebirth there, you do this practice, this meditative absorption, and in this state of mind, coarse feelings and coarse discriminations are temporarily stopped. They're not arising. They're not coming up while you're in that meditative state, but they do arise later. So he's saying that is similar to this case of people who just temporarily stop afflictive emotions from arising, but it's not permanent, it's not long-term, because they will arise again. The next part, in answer to the statement, so here an opponent from one of the lower schools is again trying to say that these paths, the course, Four Noble Truths, do stop attachment. And attachment here means craving. You know, in the 12 links, the craving that comes up before we die and activates the karma to cause rebirth. So this person's trying to say, but you know, you meditate on those paths, you'll stop that attachment. And so it's definite that you will not take rebirth due to karma. But in answer to this, Shantideva says, this attachment is not afflicted, but why is it not like obscuration? So this part's a little complicated. I can't say I fully understand it, but Shantideva is saying, and Geshe mentioned this as well, he's saying to the lower schools, you assert there are two types of ignorance, afflicted ignorance and unafflicted ignorance. So why don't you assert that there are two types of attachment, afflicted and non-afflicted? So just to clarify this, Geshe Gyatso said that according to the Prasangika, there's no such thing as unafflicted ignorance. The lower schools do say there's such a thing as unafflicted ignorance. There's afflicted and unafflicted ignorance. But Madhyamika Prasangika does not agree with that. They say all ignorance is afflicted. The reason is because both conceptions of self, of persons, and of phenomena are ignorance. The grasping at a self of persons, grasping at a self of phenomena are all forms of ignorance. And therefore they are afflictions, they are afflicted. Whereas the lower schools say that only the conception of the self of persons is an affliction, but the conception of self of phenomena is not an affliction. Oh yeah, I remember now. Yeah, the Svatantrika Madhyamikas say that. Yeah, they say that they don't talk about emptiness in the same way that the Prasangikas do, but they say that there's hearers and solitary realizers who want to attain nirvana, and then there's bodhisattvas who want to attain Buddhahood, who want to go all the way to Buddhahood. And so they say that for hearers and solitary realizers, it's enough to realize absence of a self-sufficient, substantially existent self, that coarse kind of selflessness in order to attain nirvana. And the conception of true existence doesn't have to be overcome in order to attain nirvana. It's not an affliction. But if you want to attain Buddhahood, you want to go all the way to Buddhahood, you have to overcome the conception of true existence, because that's the cognitive obscuration. Those are the cognitive obscurations that have to be overcome to attain Buddhahood. Yeah, so according to Svatantrika Madhyamika, even though they do accept conception of self of phenomena, grasping at true existence of phenomena, they say it's not an affliction. So I guess that would be an example of unafflicted ignorance. A little complicated. Sorry. Yeah, when you get into the tenets and each school having their different assertions about the afflictions and which ones have to be overcome to attain which state and so on, it's very complicated. So anyway, according to the lower schools, there are these two kinds of ignorance, afflicted and unafflicted. But according to Prasangika, there's only afflicted ignorance. All ignorance is afflicted. And then attachment, so again, for the lower schools, that means from Vaibhashika up to Svatantrika, so all the non-Prasangika schools, they also say there's unafflicted attachment, unafflicted craving. So this is what Geshe Gyatso said, but he didn't say what it was. But for Prasangika, this is not the case. Attachment or craving is always afflicted. So that's as much as I can share about that passage, but that was a kind of complicated one. And then partway through that, the paragraph that starts with, why not also assert afflicted? Oh, sorry. Yeah, the opponent asserts two types of ignorant obscuration. So partway down from there, there's a sentence that says, therefore the meaning of this passage is, meaning it's explaining Shantideva's assertion, I think. The meaning of this passage is, according to Geshe Gyatso, there are two types of craving, one induced by coarse self-grasping ignorance and one induced by subtle self-grasping, or also can be called a view of the transitory collections. So there's two types of craving. So again, there's coarse and subtle, like we've been talking about. There's coarse craving and subtle craving. And one who has only abandoned the coarse afflictive emotions, but again, it's not really abandoned, but temporarily stopped. One who's only done that has not abandoned the subtle view of the transitory collection, the subtle ignorance, subtle attachment, and so on, and therefore has not abandoned the seeds of both the subtle and coarse afflictive emotions. So that's basically what's been said all along. Just by abandoning, which means temporarily suppressing, the coarse level of the afflictive emotions, ignorance, craving, and so forth, then you can't abandon the subtle one. So those are still there. And in fact, all of your afflictive emotions and the seeds of your afflictive emotions are still there in the mind. And then there was a discussion about feeling and attachment. So the next verse from Shantideva says, attachment occurs through the cause of feeling, and they have feeling. So here Shantideva is giving the reason why one who has abandoned the coarse afflictions through other paths hasn't overcome the subtle one. So what he's saying here is, if you haven't realized emptiness, you still have ignorance. Because you still have ignorance, then when feelings arise, you have a pleasant feeling when you see some attractive object, or you have an unpleasant feeling when you see an unattractive object. This will lead to attachment. Having attachment, I want more of that pleasant object, and I want to get away from the unpleasant ones. So this is what happens if you haven't realized emptiness. And then jumping over to the next verse from Shantideva, it's actually 99, verse 99. He's giving here the antidote or the method, how to overcome attachment to feelings. He said it's by realizing that there's no inherently existing feeler and feeling. So no inherently existing I who has feelings, and no inherently existing feeling. So by seeing all of these as empty of inherent existence, that is how you are able to stop attachment arising from feeling. So again, what you have to do is realize emptiness if you really want to be free of attachment. And then there's a verse from Nagarjuna's 60 stanzas saying, how could the great poison of the afflictions not arise for one whose mind has a base? And so basically what that means is, as long as you have the conception of inherent existence, grasping an inherent existence, then it's inevitable for the great poison of the afflictions to arise, attachment, anger, and so forth. So that's as far as I was able to get in my preparation. Geshe still went through a few more paragraphs where he's talking about certain Tibetan scholars, Chaba and Sek Wangchuk Sengye and Bhutan and so on. So these are Tibetan scholars who, it seems, misunderstood Shantideva and misunderstood Chandrakirti. So their interpretations were incorrect. And he also said in that paragraph, Lama Tsongkhapa said that the view that hearers do not realize emptiness is well known in Tibet. So again, that's probably why Lama Tsongkhapa is spending so much time on this point.
That section really answered that question.
Yeah. So even some of these great, I think Bhutan was considered a great scholar. Sakya, was he Sakya? I think Bhutan. Yeah, so some of these are really well-known scholars, but what did he say? He said, these commentators have not discerned the detailed meaning of the complete reasoning. They err greatly in rushing to impute fault to the great wise Shantideva. It just shows how difficult it is to really get the right meaning. And some scholars found fault with Chandrakirti. I think he also mentioned in some of these places that there was some things missing, and he was trying to give us. So I'm glad that Venerable Children asked him to send us those missing parts. He talked really fast and it was hard to get it all down. But anyway, the conclusion to all of this discussion is that in order to completely abandon the afflictive emotions and their seeds, so that they will never arise again in the mind and we'll never experience those sufferings and rebirth and so on, then it's necessary to rely on the uncommon path, meaning the view of emptiness, meditate on emptiness.
When Geshe was talking, and you've been talking today about these two categories of afflictive emotions, when he said in a sense when one is temporarily abandoned, the other one is still operating. So are we talking about when somebody is in either one of these stages of meditation where the coarse afflictions are stopped, but the conception of true existence is still playing? Or is it when you're not in concentration and you're just being part of your day, things have been somewhat subdued, but there's still the appearance of inherent? I'm wondering what it means still functioning, and when is this happening, this abandoning and functioning thing?
Yeah, I wondered about that too, so I can't answer it. Yeah, he said there are two categories. I mean, what I put down in my notes, there are two categories of afflictive emotions in the sense that when one is temporarily abandoned, the other can still be functioning or operating. This is what the text is saying. And yeah, there's something about a distinction, a differentiation. He said, yeah, there was something in that section of the text that wasn't translated properly. Yeah, he said it was not translated properly or something was missing. So I'm just kind of waiting to get the missing bits. But no, I didn't understand. I mean, they do say that, for example, when you develop calm abiding, and then on the basis of that, you attain these concentrations, the higher states of mind, first concentration, and so on. You haven't totally eradicated the afflictive emotions, but they're not operating. For example, in the form realm, in all the 4 levels of the form realm, there's no anger. Anger never comes up. So the seeds are still there. They haven't been abandoned. So maybe that's what he means. So there's a period of time when you're in the form realm, you never get angry. But you could still have other afflictions. There's attachment specific, not attachment to desire realm, like desire realm attachment, that's also been abandoned, or that's been suppressed. But you get attached to your bliss, attached to the bliss of concentration. So there's still some afflictions that are operating, that are manifest in that, in those realms, but others have been, the lid is on. But then once you leave those realms, once you die, and if you get born again in the desire realm, then those desire realm afflictions can arise again. So maybe that's what he's talking about, I'm not sure.
I appreciated the last question today, and I also appreciate your examples that you've given about, you know, like the salesman and the sheep and the shepherd. Do you have a good example for grasping an inherent existence? Or a good analogy? Different?
Yeah, when we were studying Madhyamika with Khensa Jama Tekchok, at one point he was pulling things out of, what's that text? Lekshe Nyingpo, Essence of Eloquence. So there's something in there specifically about this conception of self-supporting, substantially existent, and different assertions about it. And I made a kind of summary of maybe I can find it quickly, the points that he made. Yeah, it's actually only about that. It's only talking about the different levels of the selflessness of this conception of a self-sufficient, substantially existent self. Not about the conception of true existence. So I can't remember hearing an analogy of that. Yeah.
Do a bubble? That would be something that that appears not as it exists, not as it appears.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe among those there's something. I'll see if I can find something. If I can find something from elsewhere. Yeah, because it is a bit hard. There seems to be more information about how the conception of self-sufficient, substantially existent self perceives the self, you know, the master and servant and da-da-da-da-da. But when it comes to the subtler one, yeah, that's harder to illustrate, harder to give analogies for.
An extrapolation question of something that Venerable Tarp and I have talked about before. But when we talk about the 12 links, that the 12 links can be cut at ignorance or in 2 places, at ignorance or at craving, right? When we're going to cut the 12 links.
Well, what do you mean by cut?
Well, that's the question really. But when I'm looking at this here,
cut temporarily or cut permanently?
It looks pretty clear that to really cut that link, we have to have the realization of emptiness.
I have the sense that in the Theravada tradition, they do talk about cutting it between feeling and some, you know, after feeling arises and stopping the craving and the grasping and so on. But that doesn't seem like cutting in the sense of totally eradicating, more just not, I'm not sure, I don't know enough about that to say, but
I remember looking in Buddhism, One Teacher, Many Traditions, and the reason I look there is because that book is shorter.
Which one, Buddhism and...
Buddhism, One Teacher, Many Traditions is very consolidated. And so sometimes it's a little easier to find something.
Yeah, so I think this question came up once before, maybe when we were doing reviews of the Pramana Vartika class.
Clarification, the emptiness of the substantial existence, is that also a non-affirming negative?
I can't remember hearing anything. Have you heard anything about that? Probably is. I mean, when you have the realization, I think you go about it in a similar way. You look for this, you would identify the object of negation, this sense of a substantially existent self, and then you use reasoning to analyze it to see if it exists or not. That was one thing he said today that I thought was interesting. He said, using the reason of impermanence and being under the control of karma and afflictions, remember that? He said those are the reasons to prove that there is no self which is a master of the aggregates. That's an interesting one. Yeah, so anyway, you use reasoning to realize that that kind of self doesn't exist. So I would imagine, I don't know, no, I can't say for sure, but when you do have that realization, you experience the emptiness of that kind of self, that would be a non-affirming negative. I mean, I haven't heard that specifically, but my guess is that it would be. It's just a mere emptiness that doesn't, it's not affirming anything else, it's just negating that kind of self, which in fact doesn't exist. It's non-existent. It's only our conception that believes in it. And also, I found yesterday you were asking about the meditating on the Four Noble Truths, depending on the coarse or the subtle form. So actually the next part of the text is talking about that. Next year we'll get to it. But if you want to read it, I'll put this back in the library, or I don't know. Do you have the file of this text? Do you have the? Maybe I can give you the PDF. Yeah, right at the start of chapter 7 in the book, where it says liberation is impossible without wisdom of emptiness. There's a section about, it's a quotation from a sutra, Adhyashaya Sutra. And the Buddha is talking about, he says, if there's a magical display, like a magician creates the appearance of a woman, and a man feels desire for the woman and gets all caught up in desire, and he feels really ashamed of that. And then, so he contemplates the woman to be ugly, impermanent, miserable, empty, and selfless. So he contemplates those aspects of the true suffering in order to overcome his desire. And then the story goes on, but anyway, the point is this is foolish because the woman doesn't exist anyway. She's not a real woman, so you don't need to. So I think the point is not that we shouldn't meditate on impermanence and so on and so forth, but we shouldn't do so while still conceiving things to be truly existing. If we think this body is truly existing, inherently existing, and then we're meditating, it's impermanent and it's miserable and it's unclean and so on and so forth. This is kind of foolish. That's the point of that. So it's basically the same point, that if you're only meditating on the basis of the coarse, not the subtle conception of grasping at true existence. You're not trying to get rid of that one, but you're just trying to get rid of the coarse one. You're not going to get very far. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Anyway, I haven't read very far into the next section, but I just noticed that and I thought it related to your question. So there is a difference, whether you're on the side of the lower schools, only meditating on emptiness of a self-sufficient self, or if you're on the side of the Prasangika and meditating on emptiness of true existence. There would be a difference in how you meditate on the 16 aspects of the Four Noble Truths.
I was asking about the clarification because I was thinking, um, is it actually an affirming negative because it affirms inherent existence while negating substantial existence?
I mean, that's a good question. Yeah, if someone is meditating, if someone is still under the influence of the conception of true existence, inherent existence, and they're meditating on the absence of a self-sufficient, substantially existent self. But I would think that, I mean, Lama Tsongkhapa says that in here and elsewhere, that, you know, even if we haven't realized emptiness, you know, so our mind is still under the influence of grasping at true existence. It isn't the case that every single mind that we have is grasping at true existence. Yeah, things always appear to us as truly existing or inherently existing, but we're not always grasping at that. So sometimes we have, you know, correct consciousnesses. You know, we're not grasping at the object as truly existing, even though it appears that way. So I would think that if somebody is meditating on the absence of self-sufficient, substantially existent person, and if their mind isn't under the control of grasping at true existence, then I don't think that would be affirming their conception of true existence. That's just my guess, but I've never heard any explanation of that. But maybe if you read the next section of the text, I'll explain. I'll read it too. I'll try to figure that one out. But yeah, there's still quite a bit of material in this particular what do you call it, topic, because the next part goes into he's taking quotations from sutras, Mahayana sutras, Hinayana sutras, quotations from Nagarjuna, and so on, and pulling out all these quotations to support his assertion that hearers and solitary realizers must meditate on emptiness, must realize emptiness. It's a difficult section, but a lot to think about.
We don't have any arhats that came forward and said, yeah, he was right.
Well, there is something in here about Shariputra. Yeah, some statement that Shariputra made, and he's analyzing that statement and coming to that conclusion. Yes. I have to hang on until next year, next teaching. Yeah.
I found something in a tenant's chart that I have, that the lower schools, mind only and below, don't accept non-affirming negations, but the autonomy school says that the subtle selflessness of persons are both non-affirming negations and conventional truths. That's from yeah. That's from the tenant's text in Cutting Through Appearances.
Mm. So it's only the Madhyamika schools that even talk about affirming and non-affirming negation. I don't know if that's true. No, I thought Satrantika does. Huh. Anyway, I think we've gone over time. We should probably end here. We can't answer all our questions in one session. Yes.